All right, we are back. Told you yesterday. Don't think you won't be seeing more of us, and here we are once again. Stokastic CFB fly before lock. Even though we've got a couple hours until kickoff, we're going to get in before these MLB games, which will be coming up soon enough. But you guys know the drill. We're here to break down the 8 games tonight on the schedule. I am Ben Rasa. I am joined by Matt Gajewski. We've got more football to talk about, sir. Last night we saw a little bit of everything. Let's get your impressions there. How did the night treat you yesterday?
DFS was solid. It was a lot of what we expected. We had some pretty good plays. I think our top 2 quarterbacks were John Reese Plumlee and Spencer Sanders. It's just hit the absolute stone nuts there. Running back was pretty good. Antonio Brown did exactly what he was supposed to on some pretty good receivers like Charlie Jones, who were really cheap. So did not get that all together in one lineup, but overall it was a profitable night, having little pieces here and there in tournaments. So I'm happy with it, and hopefully we can run it back today.
That's right. It was a mixed bag on the betting side. New Mexico State and their gutless 0. Anytime this is just work. When you're getting 36.5 points in a game and you only allow 38 points, normally you cover. But when you score no points, that can be a little problematic. So a little bit of everything. I thought Tennessee looked really crisp. It was Ball State. We will see when some of these teams play tougher competition. But of course, we've got a lot to get to today. It's good to see everybody in chat. You guys know the drill. We're going to be breaking down everything. We're going to be answering your questions. We're going to be talking about prize picks and everything in between. I always like to start kind of with the slate overview, though. We've got 8 games here, more FCS teams. Is it more of the same, or do you feel like this Friday slate has a different feel than week 0 or the Thursday slate?
Quarterback is kind of rough tonight. I think that's the biggest thing. We'll get into it, but there's a lot of oars on the depth charts. Teams without clear starters, teams in blowout situations where maybe they're going to put a backup in, and then just teams without much talent. So, we have clear starters on teams like Illinois and Indiana, but do you really want to be targeting those signal callers in terms of upside? So it creates a really weird environment on the slate where I've been toying with going multiple running backs or playing a non-QB in the super flex. I still don't think I'm going to do it, but I at least had that thought for a moment this morning because of how bad quarterback actually looks.
Yeah, there are a lot of oars, a lot of questions, and this we're going to try to dig through. We'll see what information comes out. Some live dogs on this and some possible FCS winners on this slate. There's a team like William & Mary, they're only 4-point dogs. Let's get into that, but let's start where we always do with our friends at PrizePicks. You guys have seen them, you've heard about them, and a lot of you play over there. But if you're new, if you're coming in, let me tell you a little about what PrizePicks got going on. Daily prop-based contest really soft for college football. These lines are very attackable. You're going to be projecting over under things like rushing yards, passing yards, TDs, all different categories. You do 5-player lineups, get up to 10 extra entry fee, and we're going to give you that $100 first match deposit bonus with the promo code Awesemo. You get on in there. No reason not to take advantage. Yesterday, we had some opportunities, and today there's guys. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on a guy like Peyton Thorne or even Riley Leonard for Duke. You've got some of these signal callers with pretty low passing yard totals.
Yeah, it's so hard on PrizePicks when you have all of these timeshares.
Yep.
And Leonard stands out to me as somebody that could be a decent option. Duke changed offenses this offseason. They're expected to be more pass heavy, more up tempo. So you're kind of just betting on an unknown player. We saw Leonard briefly last year. He wasn't terrible. He's actually a good, solid dual threat. And tempo offers no resistance on defense. So could even a middling talent, like if Riley Leonard isn't some stud or anything, if he's just a middling talent at quarterback, could he still go over this passing prop at 219.5 in an up tempo pass heavy offense? I think he could. So that's the first one that drew my attention. I think that's one we should be looking at towards the over. What do you think of that one?
Yeah, I'm with you there. And one other I want to throw out, and we'll talk about some of them throughout the show. I wanted to ask you a little about Dewan Mathis from Temple and specifically his rushing upside. Do you think he has any? Because his PrizePicks rushing yards is only 12.5. And this is a guy, if he can stay upright, I think he could get loose on the ground a little bit. He's not unmobile. He's not someone that's like live for the 100-yard bonus, but I think that you could see him with some timely scrambles tonight.
He rushed for 82 yards last year. He does have mobility, but he's kind of like in the Bryce Young category where he prefers to drop back and pass. He's not the passer Bryce Young is, obviously, but I think that's a decent prop to target here as well. Again, I think that's going to be an up-tempo game overall. It's been taking money towards the over, so I don't mind that one. I also had some interest in the Michigan State running backs, particularly Jarek Broussard, 65.5 rushing yards. We know Michigan State is going to play to the game script. If they're leading, they pound the ball. If they're down, they throw the ball incessantly. It should be the same offense they ran last year. And Broussard is coming in for Kenneth Walker. He's not Kenneth Walker first and foremost. He's about 30 pounds lighter than Kenneth Walker. He's about 185, comes over from Colorado. So he has familiarity with everything they do with Mel Tucker. But 65.5, even for a 185 back, is just flat out too little here, especially against Western Michigan, which they're replacing so much production. We'll get into their individual breakdown, but I think that's another solid one too.
Yeah, again, that's a team, and you mentioned they go to the game script. Well, the game script should be running it because they're 3-touchdown favorite. Your boy Berger is with him in that backfield, comes over from Wisco. We'll see what type of timeshare, but I think Broussard gets the first crack. So over 65.5, no problem there. And again, go to prizepicks.com, use the link, get your free money and go play over there. Before we get in, we're about to dive into the first game. We did have a question from Larry about some of the things. I mean, in terms of rules and stackability, I think what we always go to, you're going to want 2 quarterbacks. And then really outside of that, I think there's a lot of parameters that you can use. But is that really your hard and fast rule on most of these slates, particularly with like 8 games? You're going to want 2 quarterbacks?
Yeah, the main rules I'll set are for stacks. So, if there's specifically a team that maybe has an elite team total, when I get that quarterback in Fantasy Cruncher, maybe I want 2 of his pass catchers. I'm generally not trying to limit the players I get or anything like that. I trust the projections first and foremost. So from there, it's just about who I want in my stacks, who I want in some of these games. And there's one I think a rule you shouldn't make, which I think some people do. When you have some of these teams that have immense team totals, I think some people get scared of playing QB and RBs in the same lineup. This is all assuming the prices work out. You don't want to pay like $9K for a quarterback and running back on the same team. But if they're both affordable in price, I don't think you should necessarily limit that just because these team totals can be so absurd. It's not like NFL where the totals generally are hanging in the high 40s, low 50s. You get team totals and overall game totals in the 60s and 70s in college football. So if your team total is sitting at 40 points, I'm fine taking quarterback and running back on the same team if it's actually a good value in terms of price.
No doubt about it. I mean, you just really want to think about it. There are some offenses that are going to have 7-8 touchdowns. You can divvy them up passing and rushing and have a lot of non-correlated players get there. So definitely agree with that. Ray Kidd in chat turned $2 into $126.50 last night. Thanks to you two. We appreciate that. Love to see it. Season's just getting started. There's going to be a lot of those. We'll certainly talk about how you can get inside the ropes of Stokastic as well. But let's get into the first game. Virginia Tech, the Hokies. Only 6-point favorites on the road. This is a tricky game. Old Dominion. Let's talk about Virginia Tech first. Wells takes over. He doesn't have the elite players on the outside. I think there's more questions than answers for this team. The backfield's a little banged up. What do you expect for Virginia Tech, who looks like they're in the midst of a rebuild?
Yeah, they certainly are. I mean, they changed coaching staffs. In my opinion, for the better. Shout out Steve Boyd in the chat, Virginia Tech alum. I hope your boys get the win tonight. I actually like Grant Wells. He was really good in a lower level of competition. He's a G5 signal caller, but he averaged 272 yards per game, solid yards per attempt, and completion percentage. He's not a zero on the ground. He had 56 rushing yards last year. And that's important because if these guys get negative yards, it does count against you. So as long as they're in the positive, that is a positive for me overall. But my main question is like, who is he going to throw to? This receiving core has a lot of room to grow. They did add Temple transfer Jaden Blue, but he's been battling injuries through camp. I think he plays today, but he was listed as a backup on the depth chart. I think that's just kind of a head nod to the guys that were actually playing all camp. You should see a fair amount of Jaden Blue, and that's going to help Grant Wells. Without him, there's no real clear number one. Their leading returner, their incumbent receiver, is Caleb Smith. He's egregiously priced, in my opinion, for a guy that finished with 20 catches, 260 yards, 6,900, just a little much there. And if you're worried about Jaden Blue not playing and you don't want to pay 6,900 for Caleb Smith, which I don't, I'm probably just going to punt the position. And Dwayne Lofton, I guess, is the guy here. He hasn't played a lot in his career. He just caught 7 passes last year, but this is a younger player, an ascending player. We're not really sure what he is, but if he actually ends up being Virginia Tech's wide receiver 1, I don't think we see this price again on him. So he's probably the stacking option for this team. The running back room is a disaster. They lost their starter, Malachi Thomas. I don't think for the year, but he's not playing in this game. And then their backup, Jalen Holston's a game time decision. We could be looking at Keyshawn King as the lead back at 4.2K. And even then, I'm not sure he handles all the work because we're talking about a 180-pound running back. So there's a lot of questions with Virginia Tech. Like you said, more questions than answers. But late news could be key here with some of the injuries they're dealing with. I would for sure watch Jalen Holston. You might be able to get an edge with Keyshawn King.
Yeah, that would be a pay down running back. None of these guys, I mean, they haven't been in. I can't tell, particularly with King. He's the type of guy, he doesn't strike me as a great pass catcher, but at the same time, I don't have a great body of work on what he's really done. Could be involved. I don't think overall we can bank on that, but Virginia Tech's going to have some production. They are slight road favorites here. So I get it. When you look at in terms of lineup construction, I assume you're comfortable targeting Wells, and then you're just going to pair him with some of these guys that we just mentioned.
Yeah, I think Wells is actually a good GPP option. We're talking about how bad this quarterback slate is. We know Wells is going to play the whole game. His price isn't great. His projection's not great, but for stacking and upside in tournaments, he's one of maybe like 4 or 5 quarterbacks on this slate that's going to play the whole game without a doubt outside of injury. So that it matters for something on this slate. So Wells, I think, is in play.
One of those other quarterbacks, I believe, unless you tell me otherwise, would be Wolf on the other side, who took over last year. And Old Dominion had a weird season. They were bad and then they were good. They rattled off a lot of wins and they have a lot returning. I do think they're a very dangerous team in this game. I kind of do lean to them in the betting markets. But talk to me about Hayden Wolf, who's pretty cheap when you look at the quarterbacks.
Yeah, this team, I think they lost their first 5 games, but they didn't play in 2020. So I think some hiccups were expected. And then once they got it together, they rattled off all those wins, and it coincided with Hayden Wolf being inserted as the starter. They started DJ Mack over him, which was an egregious decision. Now they actually have a competent backup in Brendan Clark, who's a Notre Dame transfer. So Wolf can't struggle. Otherwise, the leash is going to be short. He's pretty good as a passer. The only issue is he's one of these guys that is so negative in terms of his rushing, it actually hinders you. Negative 92 yards in about 6 starts last year. It's almost negative 3 yards per attempt when you include sacks in there. That is a lot to overcome, especially for a team that's still an underdog, even though a lot of people are on them. They're implied for just north of 20 points. That's not great. And if Hayden Wolf is going to be taking sacks, that's something we have to at least monitor here. He's cheap at 5,100. That should be said, but I'm not really interested in these quarterbacks that take so many sacks. It really hurts your upside.
Do you think that means on PrizePicks that's possibly a spot to look at? Hayden Wolf's rushing yards prop is -4.5. And when he was out there last year, he was eclipsing that in the bad way every single start. Legitimately, he in his last 6 games, he was worse than -4.5 rushing yards.
Yeah, I looked at this. Honestly, it's a good bet. I didn't personally take it, but
I think you can do it.
I think you can too.
Like Virginia Tech's front is not super lethal, but I do think they'll be able to get to him. And if you get a couple sacks, he's not getting it back. I think we both are saying that.
And I mean, he was taking those sacks in Conference USA last year. They're in the Sun Belt this year, but it doesn't matter. They're playing Power 5 competition. Even in a rebuild, Virginia Tech has more horses than the teams he was facing and taking that many sacks against.
This is true. Now, the guy I really want to get to, and I think probably the most pertinent player from this whole game would be Blake Watson in the backfield, flat 4K. A lot of touches there. Does he strike you as someone that we really need to consider tonight?
Yeah, it's a pretty good running back slate. So he's in play with maybe 4 or 5 other guys as really strong options. He's going to be your cheap punt guy that you can get to with confidence. Rushed 215 times, over 1,100 yards, 8 scores. He's small, but he's still involved in the goal line. That's important. Good pass catcher here too, caught 10 balls. I think he's firmly in play. There's really no negatives to him outside of them being slight underdogs here. So Blake Watson, pretty easy valuation. He should be the lead back and feature back for most of the game.
On the outside, again, we'll see if they're trailing. Jennings looks like, I don't want to say the alpha, but probably the most explosive player. He's flat 5. Then you got a handful of cheapies. I assume if you're going to Wolf, considering he has no rushing upside, you're going to have to pair him with at least one of his Monarchs pass catchers.
I'm expecting Zach Kuntz to be the highest owned player on the slate. 3.6K. This guy caught 73 passes last year, nearly 700 yards and 5 scores. He's this big 6'8", 245-pound tight end who operates as a receiver in a lot of the offensive plays. He's 3.6K, which is unbelievably cheap, even for a team that has a team total just north of 20 points. Zach Kuntz is a phenomenal price-adjusted play. But to your point, Ali Jennings is the more explosive player. He had fewer catches. He caught 62 of 97 targets, but he went over 1,000 yards receiving 5 scores. He's going to be your more explosive option, but you have to pay $5K for him. So he's a little bit more. I think Kuntz will be cheaper just as the punt option. They rotate their wide receiver 2 and 3, so I'm not sure we're getting much behind that, especially with Kuntz being so cheap. I don't really see a need to target Isaiah Page or Javon Harvey or Jordan Bly. They're just going to be in a rotation, and Kuntz is already cheap enough to target.
Anything else from this game? I mean, you mentioned kind of everyone on each side. It would seem, again, Watson as a pay down at running back, and then salary relief for the Old Dominion side.
For sure. They're really cheap in this game. I think probably because they were like 8-9 point underdogs when the slate was released, and now they're like 5-6.
Yeah, they are taking money.
Yeah.
Some of it mine. Western Michigan, Michigan State next up, 21 points favorite for the Spartans, 53.5 point total. So far, the MAC has not looked great. I was telling you before the show, I watched Akron yesterday. It looked awful, but that's neither here nor there. Western Michigan, on a macro level, is always a pretty good MAC team usually, but they've got some serious questions that I'm hoping you can answer. And the first one is, what are they going to do at quarterback? Because they lost a true signal caller last year. Who steps in? And then what do we look at for Western Michigan?
Jack Salopek should be the starter here. I don't know if he plays poorly that he gets the longest leash. So at 6,300, he's not my favorite play, but just as the probable starter here, I think he's in play for DFS. We don't know what he is. If he ends up playing anywhere near like what Caleb Ellaby did, he's not going to be this cheap ever again. But with that said, this guy has 5 pass attempts in his career, no rushing attempts. No idea if he's mobile. We haven't seen it whatsoever. For what it's worth, he has been in the program for 2 years, so he should know the offense fairly well at this point. But he also lost his top receivers. He lost Jalen Hall, who transferred to Western Kentucky, and Sky Moore, he's off on the Kansas City Chiefs, who was an enormous loss. Ellaby would just pitch Sky Moore these screens last year, and then he would just do it himself, take it to the house, and really propel Ellaby to some productive games. And I don't know if Salopek has a guy like that. His wide receiver one's going to be Corey Crooms, who had 44 catches, 768 yards last year. That was solid. He'll have to make a big step up here if he's going to really fill the void that Sky Moore lost. And outside of that, they tried to address this via the portal. Jelani Galloway comes in from Boston College. He has 17 career receptions. AJ Abbott comes over from Wisconsin. This guy has 3 career catches in a pretty lackluster Wisconsin receiving room. I don't have a lot of confidence in these players behind Corey Kroom. So Salopek and company aren't really solid targets for me.
So the running backs, particularly Sean Tyler, is a guy that I want to ask you about. He's just south of 7K. Do you think he can run against this? It's a 2-part question, I guess. 1, can he run against this front? And then 2, does someone like, what's this guy's name? Jefferson to factor in terms of a timeshare? How do you see kind of the backfield breaking up for Western Michigan?
They used it as about a 50-50 timeshare with Tyler operating as the pass catching back. Jefferson caught a few passes himself, but he's like the bigger back in this offense, the grinder back. Jefferson's 235 pounds. He's a Michigan State transfer, not efficient on the ground whatsoever, really. And Tyler, he's 185, tons of catches. That's going to be his role on third down. There's a pretty big price difference between these guys. And Tyler at 6,900, just too much for me to pay on a slate where you're looking at a 3-touchdown underdog. The same with Jefferson. He doesn't catch passes. He's going to need to fall into the end zone. And how many times does Western Michigan do that tonight? Their implied team total is sitting right around 17 points, which isn't great. So to me, I'm going to avoid these guys, but for tournaments, they should be relatively unowned.
For tournaments, last couple of guys I just wanted to ask you about, in terms of the Western Michigan wide receivers, you talked about Crooms, you mentioned Galloway. I guess the next guy would be AJ Abbott. Does he even factor in terms of relevancy, or is it just the guys we've already mentioned?
You could play him as a punt, but again, he's 500 more than Kuntz. So that is just pure tournament leverage potential type plays here. He projects way worse than Kuntz at a more expensive price.
And then in terms of this, do you think you're going to target a guy like Salopek with some of these guys, or does the team, you mentioned a 17 implied total, it's a rough spot for Western Michigan overall?
I haven't built any lineups yet. The luxury of doing a live before lock, 3 hours before lock, but I may play Salopek in a few lineups just with the uncertainty there and the lack of decent options on the other side.
No doubt about it. Yeah. Can you play 2 ODU guys in the same lineup? I think so, because they're so cheap. It's less than 8K total if you go to the 2 obvious ones.
100% agree. And I think there's 3 obvious ones with Jennings, Kuntz, and Watson. You can really mix and match them.
Do you anticipate having any lineups with those 3 and not Wolf?
Probably not.
Yeah.
I would be surprised. There's some pretty good spots. One of them's on the other side of this game.
That's true. So you got Peyton Thorne, who returns. He's good. He knows what he's doing. And certainly he can move a little bit. I'm actually a fan of him. 8,100 feels reasonable. Massive team total. Let's just start there. I'd be shocked if you told me you didn't think he was in play.
No, I think he's the best quarterback on the board. Solid rushing ability, massive team total, 250 yards rushing last year, 5 scores there, averaged 249 passing yards per game, eclipsed 300 yards on 3 occasions, went over 250 yards on 5 other occasions. So he has a really good floor, both as a rusher and from the volume he receives through the air. Normally, I'd be a little skittish in a spot where they're 3 touchdown favorites because we know Michigan State likes to run the ball when they get up. But I mean, we just have such a lack of talented quarterbacks on this slate that Peyton Thorne should probably be the first guy in your lineup.
Do you believe that to be true for Cash as well?
Yes.
Okay. On the outside, how obvious is the pairing? Let's just start with Jaden Reed, because they had a couple monsters. Naylor's gone. The other guy was in trouble. I forgot his name. And then Jaden Reed.
White, UNLV.
He's UNLV. That's right. You said that to me the other day. UNLV also has a slot machine.
He had like
on
180 yards in their first game in week 0.
You see what's going on, and they dusted some FCS opponents. So maybe they're back. Jaden Reed does remain here. 7,300, clear alpha on the outside. I assume he's the obvious pairing with Thorne.
Yeah, he is. Over 1,000 yards last year with Jalen Naylor in the lineup. Had 100 targets, caught 59 balls. So he's explosive as well. He offers that big playability. And this is a revenge game for him. He played his freshman year at Western Michigan. He's going to see all his old buddies trying to put up a good game. If you want to get down narrative street here, you don't need to because he's good regardless. But yeah, that's there as well. Love Jaden Reed. He's one of the top receivers in the slate. Behind him, it gets a little cloudy. I think Trey Mosley's the number 2. He did play as that third receiver through most of the year. Did have 530 yards and 35 catches. So he was pretty productive overall. It's the wide receiver 3 that I think is really cloudy. Last year, Monterey Foster was the guy that operated in this role when Naylor got hurt. But Kean Coleman's a guy they've been hyping up during camp. Jeremy Bernard is a 4-star recruit who I think is going to play a role for this team sooner rather than later. He's a top 250 recruit in the country. So it's a really high profile recruit for Michigan State to get. And he's got pretty good size. He's 6 feet, 200 pounds. So he's not dealing with any size issues or anything there. Bernard's 3,200. I think sooner rather than later, he takes over the wide receiver 3. I don't know how quickly he does it, but at this price, I think he's worth shots in just some peer tournaments. Again, really high profile 4-star freshman recruit. I think overall he becomes the wide receiver 3 at some point. But today, Reed's the best target for stacks, Mosley 2, and then really dicey for 3, but I'm going to say Bernard.
What about, we just had a question from chat. What about a guy like Malik Carr?
Malik Carr is like a receiving specialist tight end. He's not going to be a full-time player. They also have Daniel Barker transferring in at tight end. He's more of your traditional 2-way tight end. Malik Carr is the kind of guy you use as a flex out in big slot receiving situations, which is good. You know, when Malik Carr is on the field, he's in specific receiving situations, but how much is Malik Carr on the field? I'm not sure yet. He didn't play a ton last year for this team, but they also lost their tight end / H-back Connor Hayward, who was an awesome receiver. So maybe that is a void that needs to be filled.
We talked on the PrizePicks. Jared Broussard comes in. They got options though. Elijah Collins is still there. Berger comes in through the portal. I think that Broussard is going to be pretty damn effective tonight. He's sub 7K. How does he stack up? And then I do want to ask you, can he coexist with Thorne in the same lineups?
Yeah, I think so. This is a situation where you have Michigan State just shy of a 40-point implied team total, which is kind of, you don't want to just draw thresholds, but that's something that I look at. It needs to be high, and they certainly serve that. And then he catches passes. He caught 22 balls at Colorado. He's good in this role. So I think you can use Broussard across the board, really. He's efficient, average over 5 yards per carry with Colorado, and that was a bad offense. He's entering a much better system here. So I like Broussard. I think he's underpriced. Berger is a GPP option, but like you said, they have a lot of guys here. Elijah Collins, Jordan Simmons. I'm not sure who really handles the backup job here. Berger flamed out in his first chance at a lead back role at Wisconsin. So I'm not sure the talent's really there for him, but I guess we'll find out. He's going to get a chance to show it tonight, but overall, Broussard is the best guy to target in this backfield.
I'd agree. Yeah, I put Broussard at 1A. We just had a question. Broussard 1A, Berger 1B. I think it's Broussard 1A. 1B could be any of these guys. I don't think there's a clearly defined backup in my mind.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's 1B. Broussard has handled pretty good workloads in the past. I'm just not sure that's the most efficient way to play him.
Clearly, it seems like you're going to need some exposure. Like, do you anticipate having a Michigan State player on almost all your lineups, at least somebody?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I think this is the team that you have to target in some ways. 3-touchdown favorite at home. I don't know where the production will come from, but it's coming from somewhere. And certainly these guys, looking at our ownership, you're going to want to have pieces of them. I think Thorne, I'll echo your thoughts, Broussard and Jaden Reed. Are you okay? Last question, then we'll move on to Eastern Kentucky.
Let's go.
With having Reed, Broussard, and Thorne together, it's a lot of salary, but you could capture a ton of production.
Yeah, I think you can do that.
There you go. I also, for the betting side, and again, if you want all the betting picks, your betting breakdown is the best in the business over on OddsShopper YouTube. You can get my play of the day over there as well. Just go over there after the show and check out what we're betting. We'll be talking about a lot of these games in those videos. I'm not sure that Eastern Kentucky can crack that, but they are here. They are 10-point dogs to Eastern Michigan, 58-point total FCS team in EKU. Who are they? Because this is a team we never say.
Yeah, they're a team that's pretty hard to decipher too. But overall, they're a team that runs a little below average in terms of pace, but they pass a lot. 52% pass rate is actually pretty good for this team. As far as FCS quarterbacks go, Parker McKinney's not bad. This guy had 2,400 yards, 18 touchdowns on 430 attempts. So volume's good there too. Just efficiency leaves a little bit to be desired. But he's also mobile. This guy rushed for 596 yards last year. Those are pretty good rushing numbers. Eastern Kentucky actually has a somewhat decent implied team total here too. They're actually taking quite a bit of money against the spread against this Eastern Michigan team, which surprised me. But All that to say, I don't think this is the worst spot here. Their implied team total is just shy at 24. For an FCS team, that's actually pretty good. And the overall total at 57.5 is pretty good. I don't mind McKinney, surprisingly.
If you do go to him, you mentioned a little mobility. On the outside, it would seem to me, again, not knowing this team, I'll be fully transparent, that McCoy would be the guy. I know he transferred in. They've got some other guys. How do you see the wide receiver room breaking down for this team?
Yeah, McCoy's a wagon, former Georgia State player, 70 catches, 757 yards back in 2019. Georgia State's a good not FCS. They're a good G5 team. So him transferring, I don't think is really any slight to him. They have a lot of talent on that Georgia State team, and he actually produced when given the role. So I think he is a solid player. He's a little expensive, but behind him, it's really unsettled. I think maybe Mo Edwards is a guy that takes a step forward. He only had 10 catches last year, but Jaden Higgins was the guy that had the second most targets on the team, 29 catches, 55 targets, 394 yards. I think Jaden Higgins is probably the guy I would look to next. Jaden Smith is also really cheap. He had 37 catches on 53 targets. He just wasn't as efficient as Jaden Higgins. A little confusing there. But those two guys at sub 4K, they're pretty decent GPP plays off Kuntz if you're looking for a pivot in this offense. Again, they throw the ball a ton. So I'm looking at some of these cheap stacks here with this Eastern Kentucky team.
Does that render the backfield with a guy like Hewitt useless, or is that just another way to get possible exposure?
Yeah, so I thought Hewitt was going to be their lead back here, and then their depth chart came out and they actually listed Braden Sloan 1, Keandre Maglor 2, and they only did the top two for each position. I presume Hewitt would have been third. He actually led the team last year. But all this to say, it's a three-way timeshare regardless. So I'm not really interested in the backfield, especially when you can get such cheap plays at receiver.
On the other side, Eastern Michigan, despite possibly being in a back and forth with an FCS team, they still have a healthy total, no doubt about it. Taylor Powell, 7,500. Let's start there. Where does he rank amongst the QBs tonight?
He's a guy that we have a decent sample on. He, former Missouri player, played at Troy after. Now he's at Eastern Michigan. 66% completion percentage, 6.6 yards per attempt. So not great there. The issue is he doesn't run. Negative 95 rushing yards. It's the Hayden Wolf situation. Just straight up brutal for DFS. He's only thrown for 300 yards a couple times in his career. He did so just once last year. He only eclipsed 200 passing yards in 4 or 6 games. So I think the upside overall is questionable. And then if you're going to throw in that negative rushing, 7,500 is a lot to play. I think I'd just rather play the Eastern Kentucky signal caller. And the only redeeming quality is historically this Eastern Michigan team is very up-tempo and pass-heavy. So maybe that could just have enough volume to propel him there, but I don't particularly like it.
If you do go there, clearly you're going to have to pair him up. Drummond, other guys. I mean, they got a wide receiver nearing 8,000. Is that too much? I mean, are these guys in that good of a spot?
Yeah, to your point, they actually have really good receivers here. Hassan Beydoun led the team last year, 95 catches for Beydoun, just shy of 1,000 yards. So he's operating more underneath, but he returns as the number 1. They also returned their number 2, Dylan Drummond, who he caught 65 passes last year, saw over 100 targets. And he might not actually be the wide receiver 2. Tanner New was hurt for a lot of last year. He only played in 5 games, but he immediately came back, saw 41 targets in that span, 363 yards. He became more involved than Dylan Drummond. I like Tanner New as the cheap option in this offense. I think there's a chance he just operates ahead of Drummond, and we're getting a price break here because he was hurt through most of last year.
It does seem like a team that, again, they're not a good team, but Eastern Kentucky is going to give them a lot of opportunities. Last thing, and then we'll move on. Running back situation for the Eagles.
This is a timeshare. Darius Boone projects kind of well because their team total is really high, but he only had 120 carries last year, and he cedes a lot of the pass game work to Samson Evans and all the goal line work. He is your prototypical operate between the 20s. Like Samson Evans had 83 rushes last year and 13 touchdowns. Darius Boone cedes a lot of red zone work to him and the pass catching work. And because of that, I think both of them are hard to target.
All right. Can you play both QBs in this game? You could, but I would not recommend it.
Same.
B Curry.
Unless you're
very
just stacking
generous.
it in a tournament, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. The game stack I get. B Curry, very generous super chat. We really appreciate you. Took second place in the first down last night. That is what I'm talking about. We hope to do that every day. And if you want to get inside the ropes, this is a perfect time to talk about what we've got going on. You still have a day to access the weekly CFB package for $1 with the promo code Heisman. Go there, sign up, use the link in the description of this video, promo code sign up, promo code Heisman, $1. You're going to get those player projections, ownership projections, the top stacks. It is on the screen. Come and check it out. A lot of people are having a ton of success. All the work that Matt puts in, it is absolutely worth it. And even if it's not, you have lost $1. And I think that is worth the chance. Now, let's get to the game that when I saw the spreads, I was most shocked about this. It's William and Mary at Charlotte. And it's down to 4 points for Charlotte being the favorite, over under a 52. Now, first of all, we'll start with William and Mary. The spread dropped because Chris Reynolds isn't playing, but still, I was stunned. But part of it's got to be that William and Mary, they must be an okay team. So talk to me about what this team is going to bring against Charlotte.
I have questions about William and Mary. Apparently, that bettors do not. They're really slow and really run heavy. This team ran 61 plays per game last year, and they passed 33% of the time. It's a completely one-dimensional offense. Their quarterback, Darius Wilson, averaged 134 passing yards per game. He rushes a little bit, 386 yards. That's about 43 yards per game, but 43 yards per game is not enough to overcome passing for 134 yards in a single game, and that's against FCS team. Charlotte's better than that, even though they're only slight favorites here over this team because of their quarterback situation. Charlotte is better than the teams William and Mary typically plays. So to me, I'm not sure why the spread's moving so far. I think there's a chance maybe if it continues, we could get a buyback on Charlotte, and I'm really considering that myself right now, honestly. And because they're so run heavy, I don't think you want to stack this team. Not only that, but we don't know who the wide receiver one is. I think Albany transfer Tyler Odekevin could be, but otherwise, like Drayshawn Kendrick might be, JT Mayo, no idea. The player I do have some interest in is Donovan Lester. He's 6'2", 210 pounds, rushed for 519 yards last year and caught 15 passes. This team will use a timeshare running back, but again, they run the ball so much that Lester might actually be a decent play here. 5,200. I'm not going to say he's better than Watson or anything like that, but he's at least a tournament play worth talking about as a pivot situation only.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing I want to talk about is that Charlotte's defense was just absolutely brutalized on the ground all of last year. They didn't look particularly good against FAU either. Now, level of competition does drop with a team like William and Mary, but you can run on this team. The strength of Charlotte is clearly not the defense. The strength of the team is Chris Reynolds. I don't really understand what happened because he got hurt and then he came back and now he's out again. So he is not in this game. That is confirmed. It's also pretty much confirmed that James Foster will be the quarterback. I saw a little of that game. He didn't look particularly good. 7,700. What does Foster do for you on the slate?
I think the best thing we can say is he's not going to be owned. He completed 2 of 9 passes for 21 yards and a pick. Not a mobile guy either. He has 23 career rushing yards and 31 attempts. I will say this, he's played more than just that game. So you look at the full body of work, he's thrown for 364 yards on 56 pass attempts. That's 6.5 yards per attempt. So I don't think all hope is lost. That's more in terms of if you're a bettor taking Charlotte, I think that's what you're using this information for. Not so much like, okay, I want to play James Foster. I think what they really do is either get the ball out of his hand quickly to DeBose and Tucker. They're both a little bit overpriced considering their new QB, or they just pound the ball with Shadrack Bird. He was in every down back in that game, rushed 14 times for 51 yards, caught 2 passes. They basically didn't use another back the whole time. He was just game scripted out from the get-go. 7,800 now against an FCS team. Good bounce back, buyback spot on Shadrack Bird.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about that backfield. There was one guy for Charlotte that was out. If he comes back, and I think his name, I can't really even pronounce this, McEachern, is that how you would say that? You tell me, you know all these crazy pronunciations. Does that crowd the backfield, or do you think that Bird is the spot to go to regardless?
I think it's Bird. That's definitely something to watch, though.
Because I did read today, and again, it's very noisy out there that guy is expected to play. But Bird sub 8K. I get it. I also want to ask you, of course, about their alpha on the outside in Grant DuBose, 7,400. I know he doesn't have Chris Reynolds throwing the ball, but he's still playable here.
I think he's a GPP play just based on the raw talent. He's awesome. We just haven't seen him play with this kind of quarterback in a while. He's had the luxury of playing with Reynolds, who's awesome. He's a complete gunslinger.
Yep.
So how much does the efficiency drop? I'm just using the Vegas totals to basically gauge this. And it's enough where you'd rather play like Jaden Reed and some of the cheaper guys.
No doubt. It's a big loss for them. I still kind of like Charlotte in the game, though. The next game, it's one of the uglier games we've ever seen. Two of the worst teams in the country. Temple, 9.5-point dogs at Duke. And that is bad because Duke is really bad. 51-point total. We talked at the beginning in PrizePicks about Mathis. He takes the reins. I also want to ask you about former Hokie Quincy Patterson. Is this firmly Mathis's job, or does he have a potential short leash if he's ineffective?
Mathis was listed as the starter on the depth chart. He played reasonably well last year, and I don't think we saw it enough from Patterson in his career really to really think he'll have a chance to overtake Mathis unless the play is horrific. So I'm expecting Mathis with a decent leash. I guess we'll find out. All that to say, Mathis is kind of just like a middling signal caller overall. Temple, I don't think they're going to be real pass heavy based on all the hirings like Danny Langsdorff as OC. I think they're going to be fairly run heavy. They should play with tempo, though. That's why I kind of like the over. And Duke doesn't scare you. So if Mathis hits some efficiency, maybe that's how you get there. But again, he's another one of these guys that you don't love on the overall slate. And then he lost a bunch of his pass catchers. Randall Jones is gone. Jaden Blue is now on Virginia Tech. Jose Barbin's the leading receiver among their incumbents, and he's 5.5K. I'd rather just play Ali Jennings. I think if you're looking at a cheap guy, Adonica Sanders is probably the guy you'd look at just because they run a lot of plays, and some of them have to be passes. He's a Georgia Tech transfer, not really enticing whatsoever. He's 100 more expensive than Kuntz, who I still prefer 1-for-1. But again, these cheap guys are just pivots off of Kuntz, really, in tournaments or if you're stacking the game or something.
Backfield for the Owls, Edward Sadie, 5,500. Is he the lead back here? There's some other names, obviously, that may be in the conversation. They could be trailing. What do we do with Temple's running back situation?
Yeah, Sadie is the leader among the incumbents on the team, but they hit the portal really hard. They got Darvon Hubbard from Texas A&M. He's at least a high-profile recruit, much higher recruited than like Sadie. Jakari Norwood comes over from Illinois. We've seen a bit of him in his career. Again, he's played at Power 5 school, so he's a little bit more of a higher pedigree player than Sadie. But I think this is a timeshare.
Temple's going to be pretty bad, I guess, this year because Duke is bad. I'm not saying the spread's wrong, but it's got to be rough, right?
Yeah, I do think so.
Tough scene.
Duke team is kind of fun, though.
I mean, better than the Chase Bryce led. Riley Leonard, 6,600. When I looked at the slate, wasn't a guy, that really stood out, but they have a pretty healthy total. Price is not bad. I don't really know exactly what he brings. It seems like, looking at what we have seen from him, that he can move a little bit. Is that what you see? And does that make him playable?
Yeah, I think so. He's pretty mobile. Like, he projects well on my end. Cross-reference with PrizePicks. His prop is in the 30s for rushing, which is solid. He's not really expensive. He has actually good receivers on this team that are proven. He's only 6,600. Duke has a team total north of 30 now. A lot of factors are pointing to him being a pretty good DFS play. So I like Riley Leonard quite a bit here. And the receiver who comes back, who's awesome, is Jalen Calhoun. He caught 56 passes last year for 712 yards, 3 scores. That's pretty solid. He's a good alpha receiver to have. I think he's stackable. He's not going to project quite as well as some other guys, but I think you can forego that in Duke stacks.
When you look at quote unquote Duke stacks, if you have Calhoun there, who would be next on the outside? I mean, there's a million guys basically between 3,400 and sub 5K for Duke. Does one of them stand out as the wide receiver too?
Not really. They listed all these guys as co-starters. It was Jontavius Robertson, Samir Higgins, Eli Pancole, and Daryl Harding. Pancole had the most production out of these guys in terms of what he put on the field last year, but that was still just 17 catches for 233 yards. He's the guy I'd probably go to, but at that point, I'd rather just play Calhoun. If you're punting, Higgins is probably like the most unknown. Jontavius Robertson's the cheapest. You're just throwing darts, honestly, down there.
How do you feel about the backfield? So last year we had some monster games from Durant. He's certainly not there. You've got Coleman. You've got Moore. Is it just a two-man backfield that they will divvy up, or are there other guys as well?
They've been talking about using a timeshare kind of from the get-go. Jalen Coleman would be the presumed starter with Jacques Moore as the backup, but I think you even see Jordan Waters involved in this backfield. Wouldn't be surprised if it's a straight three-way committee. With that said, new coaching staff, so a lot of uncertainty here. If you want to take shots, you have potential for upside with Coleman, Moore, and Waters is 3,500.
We got 3 games left. We got 15 minutes, and then coming up, of course, we got Ship My Money. Josh Engelman talking all things baseball. They're going to be leading you up, answering all your questions. If you want to show support, if you're on the channel, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel. And of course, for the betting content, I'll selfishly say go over to OddsShop or YouTube, subscribe there. We want you as part of the community and as part of the team. Last chance to talk about Tennessee Tech this year. I can guarantee that. First of all, I know I'm a fan of what Kansas is doing. I was shocked to see this north of, 31.5. I'm not going to bet this game, but that's a lot. Tennessee Tech must be pretty rough then, because last year Kansas barely beat South Dakota. 12.5 team total, around there, 13. Is there anything to talk about from Tennessee? I can't even say their nickname because I don't even know it. It's just a team. What's their nickname?
I don't know what it is off the top of my head either.
I'm going to find out while you talk.
I think that their quarterback is going to be Jeremiah Oatsball. He's the previous Austin Peay quarterback. His best trait is his mobility. He's very mobile, but he's been knocked out of a couple FCS programs now. I'm not really confident in Oatsball. David Gist is their leading rusher. He's somewhat interesting because he was the second leading receiver on the team last year, caught 37 passes. He's only 4,100. I'd rather play Blake Watson, but if you're looking for a pivot, this guy's a good pass catcher. And then I'm not playing any of these receivers. You can't get me to pay Quentin Cross or Ashton Maples. I think those are the top 2.
But the Golden Eagles.
It's a mess.
That's what we got.
Golden
Tennessee
Eagles,
Tech.
okay.
There we go. Skyhawks is Tennessee Martin. There you go. Golden Eagles in the chat. Kansas Jayhawks. I know that. I know they have a massive team total. I don't really understand, though. Well, let me ask you this. Do you expect Jalen Daniels to play the entire game? Because if he doesn't, it seems very hard to pay $9,400 for him.
Yeah, I was reading everything from their coaching staff. They seem to be all in on him. This could just be coach speak. We don't know. But he's a captain of the team. The team voted on that. He got the starting nod over Jason Bean. This wasn't a situation with an or tag on the depth chart. They straight up have been out there in the public. Jalen Daniels is our starting quarterback. No ifs, ands, ors about it. So that should give you some confidence. Where I'm not sure is their 30.5 point favorite. So even if he's awesome, he plays the whole game, they could be killing Tennessee Tech so badly that you just see Jason Bean in the fourth quarter because of that. Generally speaking, taking in the back end, anything north of 4 scores, we project the backups for some time on the field. That is the case with our Kansas projection today. Jalen Daniels projected at about 85% of the snaps. Just know that when you look at him. If you want to bump him, you're using Fantasy Cruncher, just go right in there, use the thumbs up. That'll get you to the full game numbers. That's what I think is more of a risk to him right now than him getting benched at any point for Jason Bean. I think it's just that they're blowing out Tennessee Tech so bad that maybe you see him just out of necessity to get Daniels out of the game and not injured.
On the outside, Luke Grimm, 8,400. Again, a massive price tag. Is it the same kind of concerns as Daniels?
Yeah, he shouldn't be projected for a full allotment of snaps. And this Kansas team is really run heavy. It's the old Buffalo coaching staff. They're a run heavy team to begin with. Grimm is awesome, but he played in a really small sample last year. He wasn't a starter the whole year. He was easily the most efficient, but 8,400 for a guy that caught 22 passes last year, man, I don't know. I think I might rather just go cheaper with Lawrence Arnold, who is, again, he wasn't as productive either. He caught 27 passes, but he's 6,300. Or Quentin Skinner, a redshirt freshman. He's a complete burner, complete unknown. But the reason I like these guys a little bit more is they're not 8,400, which is just a ton to pay for an unproven receiver on Kansas.
The backfield, which obviously should factor in, they've got some transfers in there. Got Devin Neal at almost 9. I mean, these prices are just massive. I know Kansas is in a really good spot, but you're paying an absolutely massive opportunity cost if you target some of these guys.
This could be a Florida State situation where they all dominate just because the matchup is so good. But you bring up a great point. Listed 4 backs as co-starters on the roster. I think Devin Neal is the favorite for a good reason, but 8,900 is just so much to pay for him in a matchup where he should be splitting work. My favorite's Kai Thomas. If you look at the efficiency metrics of all these backs, so you take all their yards after contact per attempt, all their forced missed tackles per attempt, Kai Thomas was the best last year. He also played at Minnesota, so I think he saw the best level of competition. He's interesting to me at 6K flat. He's also a hometown kid from Kansas. I like Kai Thomas a lot more than Devin Neal just because of price. Sevion Morrison, he comes over from Nebraska. He was not really that efficient there, but 4.7K for a guy that'll see work, that's fine. Daniel Highshaw's back. He missed all of last year, but he was pretty good in 2020. These guys should all see some level of work. You just hope they can get in the end zone maybe once or twice. If I were taking a guy here, it'd be Kai Thomas. But I see people talking about Highshaw in the chat. I think he's in play too.
Probably the most competitive game of the night is a conference game. Illinois, slight dogs going into Indiana, 46.5. I think Wyoming's got serious problems, but at the same time, Illinois took care of business. They looked really good, and let's just get to it. I normally say let's start with the quarterback. We'll talk about Tommy DeVito in a second. Chase Brown seems like one of the easier plays on the slate. Cash viable, tournament viable. I mean, what's not to like?
Yeah, I lied. I said Peyton Thornton might be the easiest play on the slate. It's Chase Brown. Regardless of dominate. Regardless of game script, even when they were bigger underdogs, like Chase Brown just flat out too cheap for his role. He's going to see a massive amount of carries. He's active in the pass game. Their backup, Josh McCray, got hurt. Reggie Love is probably elevated into that role, but even more reason to just pound Chase Brown, who's a super efficient back throughout the history of his tenure with this program. Love Chase Brown. You should be the first guy in your lineup.
What does that do to Isaiah Williams? Obviously, they don't correlate, but he's, the pass catcher on the outside. Is he playable? And then we can bring in DeVito.
Yeah, I think Isaiah Williams is a tough person to play at this price because of DeVito. DeVito basically played a high school team last week, and he completed 27 of 37 passes, but he only threw for 196 yards. For reference, that is about 5-point-something yards per attempt. That's horrific against a high school team. Indiana's better than Wyoming. I can tell you that. I don't think they're great, but they're better than Wyoming, and DeVito cannot throw the ball downfield. He also doesn't know how to take a little bit off his passes. This guy's like throwing lasers that are screen passes to his receivers and running backs out on the flats. Like, easy, buddy. Just take a little bit off the ball and get it to him so it's not an incomplete pass that they have to fight to get an actual catch. And all that, to round it back to Isaiah Williams, he had 26 yards on 7 catches last week. He has to do, if he has a big game, he has to do this all himself. I don't love that price for him just because of how bad DeVito is.
On the other side, I swear to God, every team has a Missouri transfer at quarterback, and Indiana would be one of them. 5,200 for their signal caller. Or let me ask you this. Do you think it's clearly Bazelak's job, or does Tuttle have factor in at all here?
I would be really surprised if we see Tuttle yet again. This guy is complete crap. 55% completion percentage, 4.8 yards per attempt, and we've seen extended run from him at this point. What does Tuttle give you out there other than losses? Bazelak was actually decent under center, 65% completion percentage, 2,500 yards. I think his biggest issue is turnovers. He had a 16-11 touchdown to interception ratio. He's somewhat mobile, kind of. I mean, he's right around 0 in terms of rushing yards. I don't think that's a skill he has, but he's not like Hayden Wolf out there or Powell. So, I mean, you're not taking tons of sacks with Bazelak. I will say Indiana's O-line is still a concern, so take that for what it's worth, but probably not playing either of these signal callers to sum it all up. But I think Bazelak starts, because how could you look yourself in the mirror and start Jack Tuttle again?
Tell us how you really feel. First it was Craig Bowl, now it's Jack Tuttle. Real quick, before we get to the rest of Indiana, we had a question on Pat Bryant for Illinois. Any interest there on the outside?
I think he's an emerging player for sure. He's a young guy, 4,300. He was the most efficient pass catcher there. He could be worth a look as a one-off in just tournaments because you're pivoting away from Kuntz or something.
On the Indiana side, you mentioned the quarterback. Shivers comes in. Is there anything else we need to talk about here?
They have cheap receivers. We should mention them.
Okay.
Their number one, DJ Matthews, is coming off a torn ACL. He's still not going through like all of practice. I think there's a chance he's on a snap count. So I'm worried about that with him at his price, but that's going to put Cam Camper and Emery Simmons into a larger role. Cam Camper is a JUCO receiver. He's 3,200. He comes in, he's a pretty, like JUCO receivers are what they are, but I think there's a chance he comes in and takes some snaps away. At 3,200, that's a worthwhile look.
Last game of the day, most important one for me, TCU minus 13.5, going into the altitude, going into Boulder, 59-point total. Colorado has struggled. Their offense was awful last year, but let's start with TCU. Sonny Dykes comes in. First question, been adamant that they're going to use two quarterbacks. Does that render them both unplayable?
No, that they both have rushing upside, and I think they're going to run up the score here on Colorado, and their team total is already 35. They're just expensive. They're tournament plays only. I don't think there's much chance you see one play the whole game, to be honest.
On the outside, they got dudes. No doubt about it. Quentin Johnson, absolutely fantastic. Tate Barber. I mean, these guys can play. What do you think of TCU in terms of how they attack Colorado?
One, I think they're going to, so this is why I kind of like them still against the spread. I have it minus 10, but they're evaluating two signal colors that are awesome. Their new system brings in Sonny Dykes and Garrett Riley. They were with SMU last year, who was 25th in plays per game, 26th in pass rate. And because they're evaluating quarterbacks, I don't think they take their foot off the gas. As soon as Dugan comes out, presuming he starts, Chandler Morse is going in, they're running the exact same offense because they need to see which guy's better. I think they just beat up on Colorado here, and that's going to give life to this passing game with two very good quarterbacks. Like we saw Morris briefly last year, but he threw for 450 yards against the best defense in the conference in Baylor. A great secondary too. Quentin Johnson's a straight up alpha at 8K. He's not rotating, and you're going to see a lot of him in this game. He's finally going to get the chains off of him that we've seen at the previous regime, the rotating receivers, and Quentin Johnson, an NFL player that had like a limited snap share. Can't wait to see him unleashed. Savion Williams was another clear listed starter. He's 6'5", 215, big-bodied receiver. He's going to beat up on this Colorado secondary. They listed Tay Barber as co-starters with Darius Davis and Gunnar Henderson, so that's a concern here. But Tay Barber is the most productive of the bunch. I think he's a decent bet here. You're probably just going to go up to Savion Williams at that price tag, though. The backfield's going to be split. They listed 4 co-starters here, but Kendry Miller was so awesome that they ran Zach Evans out of town. He's a guy that averaged over 7 yards per carry, good receiver. Kendry Miller is awesome. You can't say enough good things about him, but they're going to beat up on Colorado so badly that you're going to see Amani Bailey and Amari DeMercado and Trent Battle. They're good GPP plays, I'll say that.
Colorado, maybe they're on the road to rebuild, but as you know, I don't have a lot of faith. Brandon Lewis was bad last year. JT Shrout, I don't really care who starts for them. I have limited interest in Colorado tonight.
The only interest I have would be Shrout is going to maybe throw more passes, assuming he's the starter. The same thing here. I don't know how you could look yourself in the eye and trot out Brandon Lewis again. I think you see Shrout should be more passing. Their receivers are really cheap because everybody left the program. Brady Russell's their leading returner. He's their tight end. I think he's fine. Montana, Lamonius Craig, he's interesting. Maurice Bell, he's cheap. That's all I can really say about this team.
It's tough. They were 129th last year in yards per game, 121st in points per game. They'll be better than that, but not by much. I hope TCU rolls them tonight. Any final thoughts? We got 1 minute before we turn it over to Ship My Money and Mr. Josh Engelman. Any final thoughts on this slate?
I don't think so. I think we hit it all.
We'll take one question from Max Howell. Who are your 2 favorite QBs over on FanDuel?
FanDuel. All right. Let me look here.
A good way to end it. Peyton Thorne's got to be in there.
Yeah. Peyton Thorne. He's the most expensive. I still like Riley Leonard over there. I think he's number 2 for me. Parker McKinney is really cheap, though. I'll say that. Parker McKinney. He's
Eastern Kentucky getting some love. I respect that. And I respect all you guys. Again, it's been an awesome couple of days for Live Before Lock. You guys know the drill. Saturdays, Monster Slate, 11 a.m. Eastern on this very channel. And in the meantime, get inside the ropes so you have that ownership and projections with the promo code Heisman. Thanks to the 3rd member of this team, Tyler Zander, behind the glass. Great job as always. For me, for Matt, for Tyler, for Stokastic. Good luck tonight. Cash those lineups, and we will be back tomorrow. More college football is upon us. Good luck, and we'll talk to you then.